Hello, I'm Melissa Matinzi. Welcome to the Pembroke School Committee candidate interview. I want to take a moment to thank our candidate for participating in this interview and collaborating with PAC TV to bring this informational programming to residents and voters this election season. Let me explain the format. Today, James Quigley will be interviewed. James will have 2 minutes to introduce himself, speak about his background, qualifications, and why he's running for office. I'll then ask a series of questions related to school issues. James will be hearing the questions for the first time during this forum. He'll have 2 minutes to answer the questions. After the questions, he'll have 2 minutes for closing remarks. This 2-minute time frame will be shown on the screen for him to see. So let's get started with the opening statement. And James, you have 2 minutes.
Hello to Pembroke voters. My name is James Quigley. I'm an 8-year Pembroke resident. I moved here with my wife, Carolyn. Her maiden name's McPhillips. She grew up in this town, Pembroke. And my 2 daughters, Emma Quigley, who is an 8th grader at Pembroke Middle School, and my youngest daughter, Abigail, who's a 5th grader at Hobbamock Elementary School. We live on Monroe Street with my in-laws, David and Julie McPhillips. David is actually a veterans agent here in town. And, you know, I have both private and public sector experience. I spent almost 15 years working in the government, both at the county level with the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office and at the federal level as Congressman Keating's Deputy District Director. Right now, I work in a public relations consulting firm, and I also do some government consulting. The reason why I jumped into this race is just the moment in time that we're in. Right now, we're currently at an unprecedented moment where over 550,000 American lives were lost to a pandemic. And as far as education goes, we've never been in a position where our students have lost this much learning time. We've had economic crises where you had social-economic issues and mental health issues that came along with it, but we've never had this much loss of learning. And as we proceed to go back into a full in-person model for schooling, I don't think we quite know yet what challenges many of our students are facing, what they've had to deal with in the last year, trauma they may have faced, stress they may have faced, and how that's going to affect them going forward. So I desperately want to be part of the process to help and be there for them.
Thank you, Jim. So we're going to move on to question 1. Given what we've learned and experienced over the past year, is there anything you would have done differently relating to the schools? And you'll have 2 minutes.
It's a great question. And I think it's easy to sit here and with hindsight to say, okay, what we know now is that transmission in school has been pretty low, and maybe we could have gone to a full person return earlier. But at the time, what we knew about the disease and how it was transmitted and the consequences of it continue to change. I mean, early on, there was a belief that we didn't need to wear masks. And then when we learned more about the disease, we did wear masks. We also, have teachers that were at a high-risk situation. So asking them to go in earlier before we had a vaccine probably wasn't appropriate. And I mean, you don't have to look much further than, what the numbers were in the early childhood field, especially as when we had surges. If you looked at the state website every day, those numbers went up, and God bless those women who went to work so people, our first responders and others could get to work every day, grocery store workers, but they were right at high-risk situations, and teachers that would have taught K through 200 would have been in similar situations that they were in. So in hindsight, it'd be easy to say, we know the transmission was low, and maybe we should have brought the schools back earlier, but I don't think we could go back and say that should have happened then. I will say the one thing that has happened is Pembroke decided not to be part of the pool testing that's offered by the Commonwealth. And I do think now that it's been extended and the Commonwealth is going to pay for it throughout the entire year because of the federal funding, the robust federal funding that it has come, Pembroke still has the opportunity to jump into that pool testing. And I think that's a way to keep kids in the classroom and to recognize when there are infections and be able to pull those students out before it spreads further.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to our second question. What is the one thing you think that residents should understand about managing the school budget? You'll have 2 minutes.
Well, it's the largest piece of the budget in town. And, Chapter 70 funding is a difficult thing to understand, but I think the simplest way to put it is because our enrollment hasn't gone up over the past few years, we've kind of flatlined on the funding that we're getting from the state. And as more services are needed for our students and as infrastructure gets older, as we do have here in town, costs continue to go up. So as we're spending about $33 million school budget, we're actually still in a deficit. At the last school committee meeting, they talked about how they needed to make up a gap. I believe it was close to $200,000 of a deficit going into this year. And one of the tough decisions they had to make is they voted to actually raise the fees on the buses, transportation for families, that will be going up, raise the fees on athletics, and raise the fees on, for the first time ever, on clubs, which the first club will be free. But after that, I believe it's a $25 fee for each additional club, which I don't agree with. But that's what and raise and to charge a parking fee for students going to the school. So it's a huge budget, but more is needed, and more is going to be needed because we're making up some of that budget deficit with the federal funds that have come in from each of the stimuluses. So as we go year after year, we have to find new sources of revenue just to stay status quo, never mind to bring in new programs and maybe rebuild or build new infrastructure for our schools.
Excellent. Thank you, Jim. And we're going to move on to our last question now. Question 3, which is, what is your vision for a student of the Pembroke Public Schools, and what skills should their education provide them for the future? And you'll have 2 minutes for this question also.
So my vision for the Pembroke Public Schools is that each student has an equitable opportunity to succeed, that we give as much effort and energy and attention to the student that's in IEP classes, but also the students that have interest in other fields, whether that's technical or graphic design or, or they have, maybe their goal is to go into the military after school. We need to be able to provide for each and every family and to meet their goals. And, I think what this pandemic is going to really shine a light on is that those families that don't have as much resources at home, things are going to get much more difficult. We have a food insecurity issue here in town that people may not be aware of. The food pantry does a good job of ensuring that families that need our resources get it, but that's just going to grow from this pandemic. We have issues around social justice, and that doesn't only relate to issues around race. That relates to issues around income and gender and religious issues. And how do we make sure all those families and students not only feel welcome, but get the services and the attention they need so they can have a full rounded education. These clubs that are offered at the middle school and high school are key. Those bring kids into the school community. They make them feel a part of things. The Pembroke Public Schools have done a really good job of creating clubs to fit, whatever students' wants and desires are. And coming off the pandemic, I mentioned raising, including fees for those. I worry that might have students step back and not get involved in those. So I'd like to see that continue, but without the
Jim,
fees.
that's your 2 minutes.
Okay.
Sorry.
No
but we
worries.
are going to move on to closing statements and closing remarks. So you'll have 2 minutes for that now as well.
Sure, thank you. First off, I think this is important. town election, and I'm taking away a little bit from my closing remarks, but the town election has been changed from May 15th to June 26th. This happened last night at the select board meeting. I know many families are anxious to get out there and enjoy the sun, and it's going to be a Saturday, really the first Saturday in summer after school. So I'm going to ask, and I'm going to plead with Pembroke voters right now, whether you vote for me or not, to make a plan to vote, whether that's going to be the early vote, a vote by mail. Don't assume you're going to vote on that Saturday, because it could be 85 degrees and you're going to say, let's go to the beach, and you're going to come home and polls are going to be closed. So make a plan, get ready to vote, whomever that is. Start thinking about that now. May 15th, I think, was a much easier day to vote due to certain circumstances. June 26th, you may already have vacation plans. So just keep that in mind. You know, growing up, I really faced some adversity as a kid. In the neighborhood I grew up, we were kind of a poorer neighborhood in Quincy and Germantown. And, you know, I remember one instance of when my community was playing a basketball game against another community, and the referee there said, you know, despite this woman now taking over, and he used a derogatory term, meaning our basketball program, he was talking about my mother, these kids are still punks. And he said that just because of the neighborhood we were from. And he said that, used the derogatory term about my mother because she was a woman. And to this moment, that stays with me. That feeling that I was discriminated against has stayed with me. I have never been discriminated against since that point. And I just think, you know, for certain students in the situations they are in, they go through a lot more than that. And they need people and advocates in their corner to make sure they get everything they need to be successful. And that's why I'm running.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim, again, for participating with this interview. And we wish you the best of luck throughout your campaign and in the upcoming election. And for viewers, thank you for joining us. If you are interested in watching replays of this interview, please visit our website, pactv.org/elections, for replay times and online viewing options, including PAC TV's on-demand and streaming service, PAC TV Prime. And please, make your choices heard by voting in the election on Saturday, June 26th. Thank you, and have a good day.